Have you ever seen a grave move? On its own? That's what 17-year-old Eli Turner swore he saw on the foggy night of October 31st, 1996. No one believed him. Not the sheriff, not his mother, not even Pastor Williams. But Eli wasn't lying. Because by dawn, 3 graves had shifted, and 1 coffin was empty. The story begins in the small town of Marrow Creek, population 1,847. It's a place that doesn't show up on most maps, tucked deep in the Appalachian woods, surrounded by fog-draped hills and an old iron gate cemetery that everyone simply calls Hollow Hill. The locals said the cemetery had been there long before the town existed. Some claimed it was built over an older burial site, something not meant for men. But that was just small-town superstition. Or so everyone thought. Eli Turner wasn't one for ghost stories. He was a practical kid, a quiet loner who spent more time fixing bikes and collecting old radios than hanging out with friends. His father, an undertaker, had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving Eli and his mother, Martha, struggling to keep the family's small funeral home running. That's how Eli found himself at Hollow Hill Cemetery late that Halloween night working alone. He was filling in for the gravedigger who'd fallen sick and had to bury a man named Henry Blackwell, a drifter who'd died mysteriously near the old rail tracks. No family claimed him. No one knew where he came from. Just a name on a faded tag and a coffin paid for by the town. The wind cut cold through Eli's jacket as he stood before the open grave. The fog hung thick, coiling around the headstones like living breath. The cemetery's old oaks creaked and whispered in the dark. From the nearby church, the bell tolled midnight. He lit his lantern, its flame flickering against the mist. The freshly dug earth was damp, the shovel heavy. He wanted to get this done fast. But when Eli looked down into the grave, he froze. The coffin lid had shifted, just slightly, like something inside had pressed upward. He blinked hard. Probably just settling, he muttered to himself, trying to sound confident. He'd seen caskets shift before. Wood swelled, soil pressed unevenly. It happened, but when he leaned closer, he heard something. A faint scratch. Once, twice. Then silence. Eli's pulse quickened. He leaned over the edge, the lantern shaking in his hand. The light revealed the coffin, muddy, closed, still. "Hello?" he whispered, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Is someone?" The coffin lid thumped. Hard. Once. Then again. Eli stumbled back, dropping his lantern. It smashed, sending a burst of flame across the wet ground before fizzling out. The grave was swallowed by darkness. He ran. He didn't stop until he was out of the cemetery, lungs burning, legs trembling. When he burst into his mother's house, mud splattered to his knees. He could barely speak. "Mom, there's someone's alive down there." Martha stared at him, half asleep in her robe. "Eli, honey, slow down. What happened?" He tried to explain, but the words tumbled out in broken gasps. Coffin moving, sound coming from inside, the thumps. She frowned, pity softening her eyes. "Sweetheart, you've been overworked. You've barely slept. Sometimes the mind plays tricks." "I heard it," he shouted, voice shaking. "I heard it moving." "Eli," her voice firmed. "Enough. You know how your father's work used to make you anxious. You've seen things before that weren't there." That stung. He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. Because deep down, even he wondered if she was right. He'd been working too hard, barely sleeping. Maybe it really was just the wood shifting or a raccoon. But still, something didn't sit right. By morning, he couldn't shake the image, the grave, the noise. He had to go back. At dawn, Hollow Hill looked different. Peaceful, almost beautiful. The fog had thinned, leaving beads of dew on the marble stones. The iron gate groaned as he pushed it open. The grave he'd dug last night was still there, but it wasn't the same. The mound of soil had sunk, far more than it should have overnight, like something had pressed up from below, then vanished. Eli's heart hammered. He knelt, brushing the dirt. That's when he saw it, A handprint, faint but visible in the damp soil. He stumbled back again. He wanted to tell someone, but who? The sheriff, old Mr. Crane, barely believed his own radio worked. He'd laugh it off. Still, Eli couldn't let it go. He grabbed a shovel from the shed and started to dig. The soil came up damp and heavy. Every scrape echoed. He kept going, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold morning. When the shovel hit the coffin lid, he froze. He hesitated only a second before prying it open. The coffin was empty. No body. Just claw marks on the inside of the lid. And a smell. Sickly sweet. Like rot and earth mixed with something metallic. Eli staggered back, bile rising in his throat. He dropped the shovel and bolted for town. By noon, everyone in Marrow Creek was talking about it. Sheriff Crane reluctantly drove out to Hollow Hill, accompanied by Pastor Williams and 2 deputies. Eli waited near the gate, shivering. The sheriff scowled at him. "You're telling me the dead man got up and walked away?" "I'm telling you the coffin's empty," Eli insisted. "You can see for yourself." Crane sighed. "All right, kid. But if this turns out to be some prank..." They followed him to the grave. The coffin lid was open exactly as he'd left it. Empty. The sheriff crouched, rubbing his jaw. "Well, I'll be damned." Pastor Williams crossed himself. "That man was buried last night. You sure you didn't move him somewhere?" "I swear I didn't," Eli said. Crane looked over the scene. "No footprints except yours," he muttered. "And these claw marks. What the hell?" One of the deputies, a big guy named Tom, nudged something with his boot. "Sheriff, you're going to want to see this." It was a shoe print, barely visible, but huge, and backward, like someone had walked in reverse. That night, Marrow Creek couldn't stop whispering. Some said a grave robber had stolen the body. Others muttered that Henry Blackwell had been one of them, a cursed soul, maybe even a witch's servant. But Martha Turner didn't believe in such talk. She made Eli promise to stay home, lock the doors, and get some rest. He tried. But at 2:47 a.m., a sound woke him, a faint knock. At first he thought it was the wind, but then he heard it again. Slow, deliberate, coming from the back door. He crept downstairs, heart pounding. The moonlight poured through the window, silvering the kitchen tiles. He reached for the doorknob. Knock, knock, knock. He hesitated. "Who's there?" Silence. He grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold night air rushed in. No one there. Just the empty backyard and the faint outline of the cemetery hill beyond. Then he noticed the footprints in the mud, leading from the cemetery, up to his door. Then stopping, like whoever it was had just vanished. He slammed the door shut and locked it, but when he turned around, he froze. There was mud on the floor. Inside the house, a long, wet trail, leading toward the basement. Eli swallowed hard. "Mom," he whispered. No answer. He grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a wrench, and followed the trail. The air grew colder with every step. He descended into the basement, the old wooden stairs creaking beneath him. The light bulb flickered weakly, barely illuminating the rows of tools and boxes. "Mom?" he whispered again. From the corner, something moved. A shape, human, crouched, facing the wall. His breath caught. "Mom?" The figure turned. It wasn't his mother. The face was pale, swollen, half-rotted. Dirt clung to its hair and under its nails. The eyes were open, milky and wet. Its mouth twitched, and then it smiled. "Eli," it rasped. The voice was wrong, like wind pushing through a hollow pipe. "I couldn't breathe." Eli stumbled backward, tripping over a toolbox. The flashlight rolled, its beam slicing across the creature's face. He recognized it instantly. Henry Blackwell, the man he'd buried. Eli scrambled up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind him. He shoved a chair under the handle just as something slammed from the other side, making the whole door shudder. He ran to his mother's room. Empty. The bed unslept. Panic surged through him. He grabbed the phone, but the line was dead. Thud. Another slam from below. Then a groan of wood splintering. He backed toward the front door, when suddenly, headlights swept across the window. A car pulling up. The sheriff. Eli bolted outside, waving frantically. "Sheriff! He's in there! Henry Blackwell! He's in my basement!" Crane stepped out, his flashlight cutting through the fog. "Son, slow down." A loud crash interrupted him. Both turned toward the house as the basement door burst open, wood splinters flying. Something crawled out. The sheriff froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The creature's skin glistened, dripping soil and rot. It was half human, half something else. Its bones cracked as it straightened. Crane drew his gun. "Stay back." But the thing just stared, head cocked, lips curling into that same awful smile. Then it whispered, "More are waking." And before the sheriff could fire, it turned and sprinted, back toward the cemetery. By morning, Hollow Hill was sealed off. The sheriff, the pastor, and 2 deputies went in to investigate. Only one came out. Deputy Tom stumbled into town just after sunrise, covered in blood and dirt, eyes wide with terror. "They're moving," he kept muttering. "All of them. They're moving." Eli never saw his mother again. Her bedroom door remained locked, and no one ever found her body. But that night, through the wind and fog, Eli heard her voice whispering from Hollow Hill. "Eli, come help me, please." The morning after the sheriff's team vanished, Marrow Creek felt wrong. The town had always been quiet, so quiet you could hear the church bell echo across the hills for miles. But that day, an eerie silence hung heavier than fog. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that follows after something terrible has happened. Something the land itself doesn't want to speak about. Eli hadn't slept. He sat on the porch with his head buried in his hands, staring toward the cemetery hill. His body trembled, not from the cold but from exhaustion and disbelief. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that thing's face. Henry Blackwell's pale, rotting grin, whispering those words like a curse. "More are waking." The sheriff, Pastor Williams, and the others hadn't come back. The townsfolk didn't know what to believe. Some said they ran away. Others whispered that the cemetery swallowed them. But Eli knew better. He'd seen enough to realize that whatever lay buried under Hollow Hill was no longer resting in peace. At noon, the church bell rang, though no one had pulled the rope. The old bell tower had been locked ever since Pastor Williams went missing. Still, the deep toll of that bell rolled through town, low and trembling, shaking the windows and the hearts of everyone who heard it. Martha Turner's house was surrounded by uneasy neighbors. People whispered about the missing sheriff, about Eli's strange story, about the grave that had moved. Eli sat inside, trying to piece together what was happening. He'd already searched every inch of the house for his mother, calling her name until his voice broke. But the only reply he ever heard came from far off in the distance, from the cemetery itself. That voice in the wind. It was hers. He was sure of it. And yet part of him refused to believe. Because if that really was his mother's voice, and then something unnatural had her. By evening the fog returned, thick and wet like smoke. It rolled through the town's empty streets, swallowing lampposts and storefronts until Marrow Creek felt like a ghost town. Eli packed a small bag, flashlight, shovel, a few batteries, and his father's old revolver, which still had 1 bullet in the chamber. He didn't plan to use it on the living. The cemetery's iron gate loomed ahead, slick with dew. He hesitated there for a long time, staring through the bars at the field of graves that stretched across the hill. In the moonlight, the headstones looked like crooked teeth, and the mist moved between them like it was alive. He told himself this was about his mother, that if there was even a chance she was still alive, he had to go. But deep down, Eli knew it was more than that. He needed answers. He needed to know what was happening beneath this cursed ground. He pushed the gate open. It creaked so loud it sounded like a scream. The first thing he noticed was that the graves weren't where they should be. Rows of markers had shifted, sunken, some tilted forward like they were bowing toward the earth. Fresh soil mounded in random spots, as if graves had been dug from below. And then there was the sound, a faint rhythmic thudding that echoed through the fog. Thump, thump, thump like something hitting wood from the inside. Eli's breath hitched. He raised the flashlight, sweeping it over the nearest gravestones. Then he saw one that made him stop cold. Martha Turner, beloved mother and wife, 1968-1996. He froze, every thought in his head scattering. His mother's grave? How? She'd been missing for less than 2 days. Who could have buried her here? The mound of dirt above her grave was fresh, still wet, still moving. He dropped to his knees, staring in disbelief. Then he heard it, faintly at first, then louder. Knock, 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 from beneath the soil. "Mom?" His voice cracked. "Mom, I'm here, I'm—" A muffled voice answered, weak and trembling. "Eli, help me." He didn't think. He just started digging. His fingers clawed at the wet dirt, throwing handfuls aside. The soil clung to his hands, his nails filled with mud and blood. He dug faster, tears blurring his vision. "Hold on, Mom. I'm here." But as he dug deeper, the voice began to change. At first it was his mother's. Then, it wasn't. The tone warped, stretching like someone imitating her speech but not quite getting it right. "Eli, help me." The voice crooned again, but this time it was too calm. Too cold. He froze mid-motion, his hands hovering above the dirt. The wind went still. The fog around him seemed to tighten as if listening. And then the soil breathed. He fell back, horrified, as the mound rose and fell, slow, deliberate, like something massive beneath it was inhaling. The earth cracked, splitting apart as fingers, gray and slick, pushed through from below. Eli stumbled to his feet, backing away, the flashlight trembling in his hand. The ground burst open, showering him with clods of dirt. A figure clawed its way out, a woman's body, dressed in his mother's nightgown, her hair tangled with roots. But when her face turned toward him, it wasn't hers. The skin was stretched, pale and thin, with eyes that gleamed like wet glass. The mouth opened wide, far too wide, and a deep, broken voice echoed from it, layered, like a chorus of voices speaking through one throat. "You should not have come here, Eli Turner." He stumbled backward, screaming, and fired the revolver. The bullet tore through the thing's chest, but it didn't even flinch. It just smiled, its mouth twitching upward in a grotesque parody of love. "Do you know whose grave you opened?" It hissed. "This is not hers. It never was." Before he could react, the ground beneath him shuddered. All around, the graves began to shift, soil heaving, stones toppling, coffins splintering as dozens of shapes began clawing their way to the surface. They came in silence at first, men, women, children, their faces warped by decay and time. But their eyes glowed faintly with a dull amber light, like embers flickering beneath ash. Eli turned and ran. He sprinted through the rows of graves, heart hammering, lungs burning. The fog thickened, twisting the path ahead. He could hear them behind him, the wet slaps of feet, the low groans of things waking after decades of stillness. He crashed through the gate, tearing his shirt on the iron bars. But when he looked back, they weren't chasing him anymore. They just stood at the boundary of the cemetery watching him. Dozens of them, silent, waiting. And at the front, standing taller than the rest, was Henry Blackwell. He raised one hand, pointing at Eli, and in that moment, the church bell rang again, 3 times, slow and heavy. Eli didn't remember running home. He didn't remember slamming the door or falling to the floor. All he remembered was the sound of that bell echoing in his skull. When he finally looked out the window, the fog had crept into town. Streetlights flickered and went dark one by one. Then the phone rang. He jumped, startled. The line had been dead the night before. How was it working now? He picked it up, trembling. Hello? Static. Then a voice. It was his mother, or something using her voice. Eli, they're not here for me. They're here for you. The line went dead. He tried to leave town the next morning, packing what little he could and taking his father's old truck. But as soon as he reached the bridge at the edge of Marrow Creek, he stopped cold. The bridge was gone. Where it should have been was only a chasm filled with thick mist that stretched endlessly. The forest on the other side. Gone. No sound of birds, no rustling of leaves, just an empty gray void. He reversed the truck, driving to the other side of town. The same thing. Roads that led nowhere. Paths that ended in mist. Marrow Creek was cut off. He wasn't sure if it was real or if the town had become something else entirely, like it had been pulled into a nightmare version of itself. The air felt different, heavier. The sky didn't brighten even at noon. The sunlight stopped just beyond the hill, refusing to touch Hollow Hill Cemetery. And everywhere he went, he heard the whispers. They weren't loud enough to understand, but they were constant, murmuring from the walls, the drains, the cracks between floorboards. Sometimes he thought they were calling his name. By the second night, he started to lose track of time. The fog never left. The clock stopped working. And then, through the mist outside his window, he saw them. Figures standing in the street, motionless. Dozens, watching his house. He dared not move. He just stared through the blinds, his breath shallow as the figures slowly lifted their heads toward him. Their eyes gleamed faintly. Then in perfect unison they began to whisper. His name. Over and over. Eli. 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 He couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his bag, the flashlight, and the revolver, and bolted out the back door toward the woods behind the house. But the fog was thicker there, so thick he could barely see his hands. The air buzzed like static, the sound of whispering growing louder the deeper he went. That's when he saw the light. A faint glow ahead, flickering like a lantern. He followed it cautiously until he emerged into a clearing, and froze. There, in the center of the clearing, was a massive stone structure half buried in earth. It wasn't a tombstone. It was older, ancient, covered in carvings that looked almost alive under the light. The glow came from cracks in the stone pulsing like a heartbeat, and written across it, in letters carved deep and uneven, were the words, "The first shall rise, the last shall dig." Before Eli could comprehend what that meant, the ground trembled beneath his feet. The cracks in the stone widened, spilling light like molten fire, and from the darkness inside, something moved. A long, clawed hand reached out, gray, skeletal, grasping the air. Eli stumbled backward, his flashlight flickering. The whispering around him swelled into a single voice, a deep, guttural sound that made his skin crawl. "Welcome back, son of the Undertaker." The light exploded, blinding him. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the clearing. He was standing inside the cemetery, in front of his own grave. The headstone read, Eli Turner, 1979-1996. He returned to finish what his father began. Eli blinked, trying to comprehend the words on his own tombstone. The stone was cold, slick with mist, and unnaturally smooth, as if freshly carved moments ago. The chilling realization sank into him like ice in his veins. He hadn't aged a day, yet the dates marked the end of his life as if it had already happened. The fog curled around his legs, damp and suffocating, the whispers growing louder, forming sentences that his mind struggled to decipher. "Finish what your father began?" Eli's heart hammered. His father. The man who had taught him everything about coffins, burial rituals, and the secret workings of Hollow Hill Cemetery. But what had he begun? What unspeakable task had he left behind? He remembered the stories his father told him as a child, tales of spirits who refused to rest, of ancient pacts and cursed land, stories he thought were bedtime folklore meant to scare him into obedience. He had laughed then. He didn't laugh now. Everything suddenly clicked. The careful way his father had avoided certain graves, the rituals he had performed at night, muttering in a language Eli didn't understand. The cemetery was alive, and not in a way the living are alive. Hollow Hill had rules and his father had been the keeper, until he was gone. And now, it was Eli's turn. He moved cautiously along the fog-choked paths, each step sinking slightly into soft soil. The graves around him were no longer neat or quiet. Coffins cracked, lids splitting, and shadows flickered within. The whispers weren't random anymore. They were coherent, echoing demands, warnings, and pleas. Some were familiar. Some weren't. Son of the Undertaker, open, release, dig, join us. Eli's hands shook, clutching the revolver and flashlight. He wanted to run, to flee from this nightmare, but every instinct told him that if he did, the fog would swallow him whole and he would never escape. Somehow he knew he had to understand. He had to find the source. Ahead, he noticed the largest mausoleum in the cemetery, an imposing structure of black stone, carved with intricate symbols and crowned by a cracked angel statue, one wing missing. His father's workshop and private crypt were rumored to be inside. Eli approached it cautiously, the whispers growing so loud he could barely think. They seemed to pull him forward, guiding his steps. He paused at the heavy iron doors. They were locked, but on instinct, he raised his hand to the carved symbols on the stone archway, tracing his father's initials, HT, engraved subtly in the design. The doors groaned and swung open as if welcoming him. Inside it was dark, smelling of damp earth and something far older, something that didn't belong in the realm of the living. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed by the unnatural chill that clawed at his skin. Rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes, strange artifacts, jars of unidentifiable substances, and dozens of burial implements. Candles burned despite the absence of any visible flame, and in the center of the room a coffin, black, polished, untouched by dust. Eli's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary coffin. He recognized the carvings. They were his father's handiwork, intricate symbols meant to bind and protect, but also to contain. His father had kept something, someone, locked inside. Before he could step closer, a voice, deep, guttural, and familiar, echoed from the shadows. Eli Turner, you've come far. He spun around. In the doorway, a figure emerged, Henry Blackwell, but not like before. This time, his skin seemed even more decayed, stretched tight over sharp bones, his eyes burning with that eerie amber glow. Behind him, dozens of figures stirred, half human, half something else, each one tethered to the mausoleum's dark energy. You don't understand what you've inherited, the creature said. Your father knew. He tried to stop it, but now, it's your turn. The dead do not remain silent forever. Hollow Hill awakens and only the keeper may control it. Eli swallowed hard. Control it? What are you talking about? You're the dead. You should stay buried. Blackwell's smile stretched unnaturally. We are not dead. Not truly. Not here. We were meant to rise when the caretaker's line faltered. Your father failed us. But you can finish what he started, or join us. Eli's mind spun. Every story his father had told him suddenly made horrifying sense. Hollow Hill wasn't just a cemetery. It was a prison. A place where the restless, the cursed, the unnatural were bound. And the caretaker, his father, now him, was the only one who could keep the balance. The weight of that responsibility crushed him. He'd thought his father's death was just a tragedy, a simple passing. But it was far worse. His father had been fighting a war against the cemetery itself. And now that war was his. As he backed toward the coffin, his flashlight flickered, casting long, skeletal shadows against the walls. The coffin lid trembled. A low growl emanated from within, vibrating through the floor. The whispers rose to a deafening roar swirling around him. The figures in the mausoleum began to move closer, drawn by his fear. Eli raised his revolver again, shaking. "Stay back. I don't want to—" The coffin burst open before he could fire. A form rose from inside, tall, shadowed, indistinct. The smell of decay hit him first, then the eyes, hundreds of tiny glowing embers moving across a featureless face. The whispers became a singular voice, clear and commanding. "You are the keeper now, Eli. Accept it, or be consumed." Eli stumbled backward, almost falling over an overturned shelf. He knew then that this wasn't just about survival. If he failed, Hollow Hill would expand. Its curse would spread beyond Marrow Creek. And the dead he had buried, the dead he had seen rise, they would never stop. But he didn't know how to accept it. He didn't even know what accepting it meant. His hands shook as he grasped the coffin lid, the whispers tugging at him, beckoning him to open it fully and take his father's place. The spectral presence pressed against his mind, offering visions of power and knowledge, of life beyond life, of control over death itself. And yet, he could hear his mother's voice, buried somewhere beneath the haunting chorus. Weak, pleading, calling him not to surrender, calling him to fight. Eli's mind tore between duty and desperation, between fear and instinct. The dead pressed closer. The shadows of Hollow Hill moved like liquid. And then, from the back of the mausoleum, a faint scratching sound began to echo, slow, deliberate, dragging across stone. Something or someone was coming. Eli's heart raced. His flashlight swung toward the sound, revealing a second door, cracked and weathered. And as he stepped closer, the whispers intensified, forming a pattern he couldn't ignore. "The first shall rise, the last shall dig." The same words from the clearing. Repetition made it real. The cemetery wasn't random. It had a plan. A cycle. And Eli? He was caught in the middle. Before he could react, the second door burst open. A figure emerged, half buried in mud and writhing vines, its face barely human, but Eli recognized it immediately. It was his father, or what was left of him. "Eli, you have to finish this, or it will never stop," his father rasped, voice torn between flesh and something beyond. "The dead, they are not patient. Hollow Hill, it demands sacrifice. It demands a keeper." Eli fell to his knees, flashlight shaking, mind reeling. The whispers became a hurricane, voices layering over one another. The missing sheriff, his mother, the restless dead, all screaming together, all calling him to action. And then, the unimaginable happened. From the mausoleum floor, the earth began to split. Grave after grave heaved upward. Coffins cracked open, revealing faces long thought gone, eyes glowing, hands reaching for him. Eli's world tilted. He realized the truth in that instant. Hollow Hill was awakening fully, and he was the key. Somewhere in the chaos, a faint, familiar whisper cut through. "Eli, you can stop it, but only if you remember." And then the ground gave a final, violent shudder. Something massive surged from the deepest part of the cemetery, shaking the very stones and walls. Eli stumbled backward, and as he fell, the whispers rose to a singular, deafening crescendo. "Dig, or be consumed." Eli crawled backward, his hands sinking into the damp soil of the mausoleum floor. The whispers had become a deafening chorus, voices overlapping in impossible harmony, calling his name, taunting him, begging him to join them. The air was thick, heavy, almost viscous, and with each breath it burned his lungs. The once familiar scent of earth and stone had turned acrid, tinged with decay and something far older. Something alive beneath the soil, watching, waiting. The massive figure that had surged from the deepest part of the cemetery was only partially visible. Its shadow stretched across the walls like black ink, blotting out the flickering candlelight. Its form was grotesque, limbs disproportionate, skin stretched taut over jutting bones, eyes burning with a supernatural light. And yet, there was something familiar in the posture, the way it moved, the weight of its presence. Eli knew instinctively. This was the first of the hollow dead, the origin, the one who had bound them all here. The coffin behind him trembled again. From inside, his father, or what remained of him, was clawing upward, reaching toward Eli with skeletal fingers and a desperate determination that was both pleading and commanding. You must finish this, Eli." His voice cracked like dry wood, broken, almost lost beneath the hurricane of whispers. The cemetery, it never forgets. The hollow dead, they will not stop. Only the keeper. Only you. But before he could say more, the first figure moved. It stepped from the shadows, its weight cracking the marble floor. Coffins in the surrounding walls splintered, hissing as if some ancient air had been trapped too long, and bodies began to rise. Limbs tore through wood, faces grimacing in silent agony, glowing eyes turning toward Eli like a living constellation of malice. Eli scrambled backward, tripping over the overturned shelves of ancient tomes and jars. His flashlight fell, rolling across the floor, flickering weakly, revealing more horrors than he could bear to see. The restless dead were not all human. Some were twisted, limbs bent at unnatural angles, faces distorted beyond recognition, crawling on all fours, their mouths opening in silent screams that pierced the mind rather than the ears. The whispers formed a coherent pattern, repeating like a sinister chant, "Dig, dig, dig, or be consumed." Eli's mind reeled. The words weren't just commands. They were a warning, a prophecy etched into the very air of Hollow Hill. He realized with dawning terror that every grave he had seen shifting, every coffin that had been disturbed, every spirit that had risen, all of it was part of a cycle. Hollow Hill demanded its keepers, and if he did not comply, it would consume him. With shaking hands, he grabbed his father's shovel from the corner of the mausoleum. The whispers grew louder, as if approving, or mocking, his acceptance of the task. The first figure, the origin of this nightmare, stepped closer, its amber eyes fixed on him. "Do you understand, Eli Turner?" It rasped. Its voice was layered, echoing with hundreds of the dead simultaneously. "You were born to dig. You were born to bind. Do not fail." Eli nodded, though his throat was tight with fear. He did not understand what he was being asked to do. All he knew was that if he failed, Hollow Hill would consume not just him, but the entire town, the entire forest beyond it, perhaps even more. He swung the shovel into the nearest mound of earth. The soil gave way more easily than he expected, as if it recognized him. He dug faster, the whispers urging him on, repeating, "Dig, dig, dig, or be consumed." Each shovel of dirt revealed more horrors. Fingers clawed through the soil, faces pressed against the earth, screaming in silence. Eli's stomach turned, bile rising in his throat. Yet he continued. The earth seemed to pulse beneath him, alive, as if responding to his labor. The first figure circled him slowly, a predator, its eyes never leaving his movements. Each time Eli glanced up, he saw the dead moving differently, less erratic, more purposeful, forming lines, almost rituals. He realized with a sickening clarity that the dead were being organized, herded by the first figure. Hollow Hill wasn't chaotic. It was preparing for something. Hours passed, though he could not be sure. Time in Hollow Hill was meaningless, distorted, bending around the fog and the whispers. Eli's arms ached, muscles screaming, but he could not stop. Every time he faltered, the whispers grew sharper, more insistent, lashing against his mind like electric currents. Suddenly, the ground beneath him gave a violent shudder. He stumbled, falling onto the mound he was digging. From the depths of the earth, a hand shot out, grasping his leg. He screamed, kicking and thrashing, but the hand was strong, pulling him downward. He swung the shovel blindly, striking fingers, drawing them back, and finally tore free. As he scrambled to his feet, he realized with horror that the hand he had struck belonged to someone he recognized, the sheriff, or what remained of him. His eyes were wide, glowing faintly, his mouth moving as if trying to speak, but no sound came. He was alive, and yet, not alive. Eli turned to run, but the first figure blocked his path. "Stop," it demanded. "You do not yet understand your purpose. You must complete the cycle." The whispers coalesced around him, forming images in his mind. Graves opening, the earth splitting, his father struggling, the cemetery alive, its tendrils reaching into the town. He saw visions of all the missing, his mother, the sheriff, Pastor Williams, pulled into Hollow Hill, twisted into its service. He understood then what he had to do. It wasn't about fleeing. It wasn't about hiding. It was about control. If he refused, Hollow Hill would consume him. But if he accepted, he could command it, bind the restless dead, and perhaps save what remained of the living. He took a deep breath, gripping the shovel tightly. The first figure watched him, tilting its head. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a low, rumbling growl emanating from the stone mausoleum walls. The dead were still, waiting. Eli approached the coffin in the center of the room, the one that had contained his father's secrets. Kneeling beside it, he pried the lid open. Inside lay a series of ancient tools, scrolls, and a blackened book bound in human skin. Symbols pulsed faintly along its spine, almost alive. He opened it. The language was unfamiliar, but he instinctively knew what to do. The words burned into his mind as he read aloud, invoking the ritual his father had used. The whispers returned, now soft, hesitant, as if the dead themselves were listening. The ground shook violently, coffins cracked open, bodies clawing their way to the surface. But this time Eli's words carried authority. The first figure froze. The dead stopped moving. The whispers turned to murmurs following his command. It was working. He realized with a mixture of terror and relief that he could bind them, control them. Hollow Hill was no longer just a prison, it was his domain. And yet, the first figure remained. The origin. It had not bowed. It had not submitted. "You are strong, Eli Turner," it said, "but strength alone will not be enough. There is one more. One last challenge. One grave remains unbroken. The grave that binds the hollow dead. The grave that must be opened. By you." Eli's stomach dropped. The whispers intensified again, warning, screaming, urging him to stop. But he knew he couldn't. Not now. He had come too far. He had seen too much. He raised his shovel, turning toward the largest mound in the cemetery, the one at the heart of Hollow Hill, covered in cracked marble and ancient carvings. It pulsed beneath the fog, almost alive, and as he approached, the ground itself seemed to recognize him, splitting slightly, awaiting his command. The first figure stepped aside, watching, its amber eyes glowing. "The cycle ends, or begins anew. Dig, son of the Undertaker, dig, and face what lies beneath." Eli's hands shook. He swallowed his fear, took a deep breath, and struck the first blow into the soil. The earth parted slowly, deliberately, revealing a darkness so deep it seemed infinite. The whispers rose into a crescendo, voices from every grave, every era, every soul trapped beneath Hollow Hill, all calling, all demanding, all warning. And as Eli continued to dig, the first figure leaned close, its rotten breath brushing his ear. "You are not alone. But know this," it hissed. "What lies beneath will not be easily bound." Eli paused. He knew that beyond that mound lay the final truth of Hollow Hill, a secret his father had died trying to contain, and a horror that would change everything he knew about life, death, and the thin line between the two. He swung the shovel again. Eli's arms burned as he dug. every swing of the shovel sinking into soil that resisted him like the very earth was alive. The fog swirled thicker, coiling around him like serpents, and the whispers, once guiding, now screamed warnings in dozens of voices. His muscles quivered, his knuckles raw, yet some force deeper than fear, some grim inheritance, kept him moving forward. He was no longer merely digging. He was performing a ritual, one that his father had begun, one that demanded precision, courage, and blood. The mound at the heart of Hollow Hill trembled with each strike, the vibrations reverberating through the ground, shaking the smaller graves around him. Coffins split open, skeletal hands clawing upward, but Eli ignored them. He could feel the first figure, the original Hollow Dead, standing behind him, waiting, its amber eyes boring into the back of his head, patient yet menacing. The figure had not yet interfered. It was a test, a challenge. As the shovel cut deeper, the air grew colder. The whispers became a chant, a language he somehow understood without comprehension, a song of mourning, rage, and desire. Something pulsed in the soil below, a heartbeat slow and monumental echoing in his chest. Eli paused for a brief moment, pressing his hand against the earth. The vibration ran through his veins. He could feel it, the graveyard's heart. It was alive. A chill ran down his spine, and visions assaulted him. He saw Hollow Hill not as it was now, but as it had been centuries ago, a place of unholy ritual, of pacts made with beings older than time, the soil soaked with the blood of those who had been sacrificed to bind restless souls. And at the center of it all, a grave larger than any other, carved from black stone and engraved with runes that pulsed with energy. This was the heart of the cemetery, the anchor of its restless dead. Eli's father had tried to bury it, to hide it from the world, and he had failed. The first figure moved closer, its presence overwhelming. "This is the final test, Eli Turner," it rasped. "The graveyard's heart binds all the Hollow Dead. You must confront it, or they will consume everything." Eli's vision blurred. He imagined the town outside Hollow Hill swallowed by fog, buildings sinking into the earth, the townsfolk pulled screaming into the cemetery's maw. He thought of his mother, of the sheriff, of Pastor Williams, all trapped in this nightmare. And he realized the truth. The cemetery didn't just want a keeper, it demanded a sacrifice. His hands tightened around the shovel. I'm ready," he whispered, though doubt gnawed at him. "I have to finish this." The ground split further, revealing a hollow blackness that seemed bottomless. A cold wind rose from within, carrying a stench of decay and despair that made him gag. And then he saw it, a hand, enormous, pale, and covered in runes, pushing its way from the darkness. One hand, then another. A massive head followed, covered in matted hair, eyes glowing faintly, and a mouth that twisted into a horrific grin. It was alive, ancient, and horrifying, the entity that had bound the Hollow Dead for centuries. It looked at Eli with awareness, recognition, almost intelligence. "You are late," it whispered in a voice that shook the ground itself. "Your father should have finished the ritual. You are weaker than he was, but perhaps stronger in ways he never imagined." The ground around the graveyard's heart quaked violently. The coffin shattered, dozens of Hollow Dead rising, eyes glowing like coals, waiting for the command that Eli alone could give. He realized with dread that one wrong move, one hesitation, and all of Hollow Hill would awaken fully, devouring everything in its path. His father's skeletal figure appeared beside him suddenly, ghostly and transparent. "Eli, you have to bind it, not fight it," the apparition urged. "Speak the word on it, feel the pulse, you are the keeper now." The massive entity from the grave extended a clawed hand toward him. The runes on its skin pulsed in rhythm with the graveyard's heart. The whispers surged into a deafening roar, a chorus of agony and hunger, urging him to resist, to run, to escape. But Eli knew the choice was gone. He took a deep breath and pressed his hands against the soil surrounding the graveyard's heart. He felt it pulse, a rhythm like a living thing, responding to his heartbeat. Closing his eyes, he spoke the words his father had taught him, a chant older than the cemetery itself, a binding song of authority and will. The earth trembled violently. The massive entity let out a sound that was neither scream nor roar, but a vibration felt through bone and soul. Its body began to writhe, writhing like molten stone, as the runes flared brighter, responding to Eli's voice. The hollow dead froze in place, bodies stiffening as if the very ground beneath them was asserting control. Eli's arms shook violently, sweat and blood mixing on his skin, but he did not stop. He felt the entity resist, felt the centuries of malevolent energy fighting him. Yet, deeper within, he found his father's voice guiding him, steadying him, reminding him of his bloodline, of his duty. Control it, command it, bind it, own it. The entity howled, a sound that rattled the bones of every grave in Hollow Hill. Eli screamed the final words, and the graveyard's heart pulsed once, then twice, and the darkness below began to shrink, folding in on itself like a collapsing star. The first figure, the origin of the hollow dead, fell to its knees, amber eyes dimming as it bowed, acknowledging Eli's mastery. The whispering became a murmur, then silence. Hollow Hill seemed to exhale, a heavy sigh of relief and submission. The fog began to lift slightly, revealing the cemetery in a pale, cold moonlight. The hollow dead sank back into their graves, bodies dissolving into shadows, murmuring thanks or curses. Eli could not tell which. He collapsed onto the cold ground, shivering, exhausted beyond comprehension. The graveyard's heart, now dormant, lay before him, sealed by the power he had claimed. He was alone, yet not alone. He could feel the presence of the dead bound to him, aware of him, waiting for the next command. And then he saw it. A familiar face in the shadows. His mother, real, alive, trembling, tears streaming down her face. She ran to him, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to cry. But the victory was fleeting. From the edge of the cemetery, a new rumble shook the earth. The fog gathered again, denser this time. And Eli knew, in the deepest part of his soul, that Hollow Hill was not finished. It would test him again. And the first figure, now kneeling in the distance, whispered a chilling prophecy. The keeper is bound, but the graveyard does not forgive. It only waits. Eli lifted his head, staring across the cemetery. The whispers were gone, but their absence was just as menacing. Hollow Hill had recognized him. It had accepted him as the keeper, but he would never be free, never truly free. And somewhere beneath the soil, the graveyard's heart pulsed faintly, a slow, steady beat, alive, waiting, and hungry. Eli woke to the sound of the wind whispering through Hollow Hill, soft yet persistent, curling around the gravestones like ghostly fingers. The fog still clung to the cemetery, but it no longer pressed down on him with the same oppressive weight. Instead, it seemed watchful, aware of him in a way it hadn't been before. He felt different too, changed. Hollow Hill's pulse had fused with his own, and with it, a terrible clarity. He was no longer just Eli Turner. He was the keeper. The realization hit him like ice water. Every sense was sharper, every shadow seemed to speak directly to him, every rustle of leaves carried a message from the dead. He could feel the gravestones, the coffins, the very soil itself responding to his presence. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound silence that hummed with potential energy. Hollow Hill waited for his command. He stepped carefully through the cemetery, the moonlight glinting off gravestones slick with dew. Shapes shifted in the periphery of his vision, shadows of the hollow dead still lingering. But now they paused, waiting, deferring to him. He had the power to command them, to bind them, to release them. But the burden of that power pressed heavily on his chest, Each decision could be a life or a death, and every mistake could awaken the horrors he had barely contained. His mother emerged from the fog, silent, her face pale, eyes wide with fear and wonder. "Eli, you're the keeper?" she whispered, almost afraid to speak. "Yes," he said, his voice low, unfamiliar even to him. "I didn't choose it, but I can't. I can't let Hollow Hill destroy anything else." She approached slowly, hesitating. "And the dead, your father, the others, are they?" "Bound," he replied. "For now. But it's not permanent. Hollow Hill doesn't forgive, it only waits. And it will test me again. If I falter even for a moment." Her hand found his arm, trembling. "Can you save them?" Eli shook his head. "Some, maybe. But most, I think they belong here now, in this place. Not in the living world. Not anymore." He turned back toward the mausoleum. The shadows within seemed to quiver at his approach, acknowledging his command. The first figure, the original Hollow Dead, was kneeling at the edge of the clearing, its amber eyes dim but still watching. There was no hatred in those eyes now, only recognition, a grudging respect. Eli's gaze fell to the graveyard's heart, still pulsing faintly beneath the soil. He could feel its rhythm, slow and insistent, almost like a heartbeat. It was alive, ancient, and aware. And it was waiting. A thought struck him with sudden horror. The graveyard's heart had always belonged to someone. It had been his father's burden before him, and now it was his. He was tethered to it, bound to Hollow Hill for life. There was no escape, no true freedom. The fog thickened again, swirling like smoke. Shapes emerged from the shadows, dozens, hundreds of Hollow Dead, each one moving with purpose, now controlled by Eli's will. Their faces were pale, some distorted, some familiar, but none moved without his command. He realized the full scope of his responsibility. He could bind them, release them, or let them roam freely. Each choice had consequences. Eli's father's apparition appeared again, faint and flickering like a dying flame. "The Hollow Dead are not your enemies, Eli," he said. "They are your charge, your burden. Remember, the first to rise, the last to dig. That is the law of Hollow Hill." Eli nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle in his mind. He remembered the chant, the ritual, the commands he had spoken. Every grave he had opened, every soul he had bound, it all followed a pattern. Hollow Hill had rules, and the keeper was the only one who could enforce them. He walked among the graves, placing his hands on the stones, feeling the pulse of each resting soul. Some shivered under his touch, others quieted, sensing his authority. He understood then that Hollow Hill was not evil. It was neither good nor cruel. It simply was, and he was its master, its servant, and its guardian, all at once. Hours passed, though time seemed meaningless. He felt the cycle of life and death more acutely than ever before, the thin veil between the living and the dead almost tangible. And then he saw movement at the far edge of the cemetery. A figure cloaked in shadow, approaching slowly. It was human, alive, and it carried a lantern. Eli's heart raced. Visitors were rare in Marrow Creek, and none had ever ventured this far into Hollow Hill. As the figure drew closer, the lantern's light revealed a face he did not recognize, sharp and pale, eyes wide with fear and awe. I heard the stories," the stranger said, voice trembling. "They said Hollow Hill, that it's cursed, that no one can survive, that the dead rise." Eli remained still, feeling the power of Hollow Hill flowing through him. The stranger's fear was palpable, but it was also trivial compared to the forces at play here. "You should leave," he said. "Now. Turn back before it's too late." The stranger shook their head. I need to see. I need to know if it's true." Eli's pulse quickened. He could feel the whispers stirring again, faint echoes of voices long bound, watching this intruder. Hollow Hill recognized another living soul. The keeper had a choice: bind them, release them, or allow the cemetery to test them. He stepped forward, planting a hand on the nearest gravestone. The soil beneath the stranger's feet quivered, a warning from the cemetery itself. "This is not a place for the living," he said firmly. "Not yet. You have been warned." The stranger's eyes filled with tears. I came for my brother," they whispered. He disappeared near the cemetery years ago. No one believed me, but I knew. He's here. Please, help me find him." Eli's stomach sank. Hollow Hill never gave up its dead willingly, but he could sense something different. This spirit lingered near the edge of the cemetery, unbound, not yet claimed. Perhaps he could help. Perhaps as keeper he could negotiate, guide, and contain the forces without losing himself. He gestured for the stranger to follow, walking deeper into the fog. The hollow dead observed silently, their amber eyes flickering in the darkness, waiting for his command. Each step he took toward the heart of Hollow Hill tightened the bond between him and the cemetery, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He approached the graveyard's heart, kneeling beside it once more. Its pulse echoed through his chest, resonating with his own heartbeat. He placed both hands on the soil, feeling the rhythm of countless lives bound and unbound swirling beneath. "You are safe, for now," he murmured, both to the stranger and to himself. "But Hollow Hill tests every keeper. There will be more trials, more dead, more whispers, and the final truth lies beneath the last grave." The first figure, kneeling in the distance, lifted its head, amber eyes glowing faintly in acknowledgement. "Soon," it whispered, "the keeper will face the ultimate truth. Only then will Hollow Hill reveal the secret it has buried for centuries." Eli's hand sank into the soil again, a chill running up his arms. He could feel something deep beneath, the final grave, untouched, massive, ancient. The graveyard's heart had been bound, but the secret of Hollow Hill waited. And he knew with absolute certainty that the greatest horror was yet to come. Somewhere in the distance the fog swirled, whispering a single phrase he could not ignore. "The last shall rise, the keeper shall dig, and the dead shall speak." Eli shivered, tightening his grip on the shovel. He was ready, or as ready as anyone could be, to face the final revelation hidden deep beneath Hollow Hill. Eli's hands trembled as he approached the massive mound at the very center of Hollow Hill Cemetery. This was it, the final grave. Unlike any he had encountered before, it radiated a cold, oppressive darkness that seemed to draw the very life from the air around him. The graveyard's heart pulsed faintly nearby, as if warning him, as if reminding him that what lay beneath this last mound was far older, far more dangerous, and far more cunning than anything he had faced. The fog thickened into almost a solid wall, curling around his legs and choking the sound of his footsteps. Shadows seemed to slither across the ground, whispering half-words that pricked his mind like needles. He could feel the presence of the hollow dead surrounding him, though they remained at the edge of the fog, obedient, restrained. All waited for his command, but he was no longer sure if he wanted their obedience. The air was alive with anticipation, as if the cemetery itself were holding its breath. Eli's mind drifted back to the whispers he had first heard as a boy, the warnings from his father, and the fragments of the ritual that had guided him this far. All of it converged into a single terrifying realization. The last grave would not merely test him, it would judge him. Every choice he had made, every soul he had bound, every command he had given had led to this moment. And now, the grave demanded the ultimate act. With a deep, shuddering breath, Eli placed his hands on the mound and began to dig. The soil was unnaturally heavy, almost resistant, as if the grave itself were alive. Every shovelful of dirt that came away revealed something new: bones, Not just human bones, but fragments of creatures long dead and buried, mixed with objects of strange craftsmanship, relics of rituals older than Marrow Creek itself. Each layer seemed to pulse beneath him, whispering, beckoning, warning. Halfway through the mound, a hand erupted from the soil, not skeletal, not decomposed, but soft, warm, and trembling. It clutched at his arm. Eli froze, staring in horror as the earth split further, revealing a figure emerging slowly. And then he saw the face. It was his father. Not the skeleton he had seen in visions or the fading apparition, but the living, breathing man he had remembered, though pale, gaunt, and marked with strange runes etched across his skin. His father's eyes were wide with terror, but also filled with recognition, love, and a plea Eli could not ignore. "Eli, you shouldn't have come," his father rasped. His voice carried a mixture of warning and desperation. "I tried to contain it. I tried to end it, but I failed. And now, it's awake. The last grave. It holds the one who started Hollow Hill, the one who made the curse, the one who never dies." Eli stepped back, horror gripping him. "Father, what do you mean? The last grave? It's alive?" His father shook his head, trembling. "It's more than alive. It's conscious. It remembers everything. It can manipulate the dead, the living, time itself. It created Hollow Hill to feed, to control, to bind, and now it senses you. The cemetery chose you, Eli, to bind it, or it will consume everything." A sudden rumble shook the ground, more violent than any quake Eli had felt before. From the final grave, shadows erupted like black water, twisting, stretching, writhing. Figures emerged, neither fully human nor fully beast, writhing masses of limbs, faces, eyes that glowed with centuries of knowledge and malice. Eli's father tried to step forward to help, but the entity from the grave, a massive, indistinct form, pulsing with dark energy, lifted a shadowed arm and threw him back into the fog. "No!" Eli screamed, rushing to his father, but the hollow dead surrounding him froze at his command, trembling with uncertainty. The entity's whispers entered his mind, a chorus of ancient voices. "The Keeper is here, but will he bind me or join me?" Eli's hands shook as he realized the truth. The final grave was not merely a resting place. It was the source of Hollow Hill's power. The first, the origin, the mind behind the endless, restless dead. And it had been waiting for a keeper capable of challenging it. He gripped the shovel tightly, remembering the chants, the words of binding his father had taught him, the rhythm of the graveyard's heart. Closing his eyes, he spoke aloud, voice cracking but growing stronger, louder, repeating the incantation with authority. The soil trembled, the shadows faltered, the hollow dead stilled, awaiting the outcome. The entity's form began to solidify, a towering figure with features both human and alien, skeletal yet powerful, its eyes burning with the memory of countless lives. Its voice echoed in Eli's mind, sharp, commanding, terrifying. "You think you can control me? You think your bloodline binds me? I am eternal. I am Hollow Hill. I am every soul you have buried, every whisper you have heard, every shadow you have feared. You are nothing without me." Eli's hands burned with exertion, veins straining as he poured every ounce of will into the ritual. He felt the pulse of the graveyard's heart beneath him, amplifying his energy, synchronizing with his command. The entity roared, a sound that shook the trees, the gravestones, the very night sky. And then, a horrifying revelation struck him. The entity was his father. Not the father he knew, not the ghost, but the original architect of Hollow Hill, the man who had made the pact centuries ago to bind the dead, who had fused himself with the cemetery to maintain control. Every apparition, every warning, every ritual had been a fragment of his father's essence, trying to guide the keeper to this moment. The whispers converged into a single deafening voice. "Bind me, or die." The keeper must rise, or all is lost. Eli screamed the final words of the chant, the power of the graveyard's heart surging through him. The entity lunged, shadows stretching like tendrils, but Eli held fast, grounding himself in the soil, commanding the very forces of Hollow Hill. Light and shadow collided, a storm of life and death erupting in the clearing. The air tore around him, the fog spinning into a vortex of whispers, the hollow dead trembling in anticipation. And then, silence. The shadows collapsed inward, the entity's form dissolving into the earth. The final grave sealed itself, the mound shrinking until it was indistinguishable from the rest of the cemetery. The hollow dead sank into their graves once more, silent, obedient, bound. The graveyard's heart pulsed slowly, steadily, as if exhaling for the first time in centuries. Eli fell to his knees, trembling, exhausted, every muscle screaming. His father's presence lingered one last time, a whisper in the wind, a fleeting shadow, a hand brushing his shoulder. "You are the keeper now, Eli Turner. Protect Hollow Hill, or it will consume you. But you have proven you are worthy." The fog began to lift, revealing the pale moonlight glinting off gravestones. The cemetery quiet, watchful, alive, but contained. Eli rose slowly, gripping his shovel, understanding the depth of his burden. Hollow Hill was not just a cemetery. It was a living entity, a force older than the town, older than himself. And he alone was now its master, its servant, its keeper. He walked among the graves, feeling the pulse of the dead beneath him, the energy of the cemetery flowing through him. Hollow Hill would never forgive, and it would never rest, but for now, balance had been restored. And in the deepest part of his mind, a single chilling thought lingered. The keeper's duty never ends. The whispers never stop. And the last grave, the last secret, is never truly buried. Eli raised his head toward the foggy horizon, where the town slept unaware, safe for now. He understood the truth finally. The horror was not just in the cemetery, but in the responsibility, in the eternal vigilance. Hollow Hill had chosen him, and he had survived. But the cost was clear. His life, his freedom, and his peace were forever tied to the graves, the whispers, and the shadows that never slept. And somewhere beneath the soil, deep in the darkness, a pulse echoed faintly, reminding him, Hollow Hill was alive. Hollow Hill waited. Hollow Hill was eternal.